Buenas tardes, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos. Hi, George. I'm going to start the conference in Spanish and then we are going to switch in English uh, to give the welcome to everybody, if you are okay.
We're good. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo está?
Gracias, gracias, George. Bienvenidos a un webinar más de la SPE. Estamos iniciando con nuestro webinar el día de hoy. Vamos a hablar de un tema que ya lo hemos venido tratando desde hace algunos años atrás, y la SPE sigue convencida de que este tema que lo vamos a tratar el día de hoy tiene un potencial importante para el país y esperamos que se puedan seguir recibiendo las recomendaciones de expertos como George en la consecución de esto. Agradecemos a George Sutherland por estar este día acá. Antes de pasar a dar la presentación oficial de George, quería un poco comentarles cómo estamos con SPE. Estamos cerrando el año, como ustedes saben, estamos pendientes de nuestro evento el 15 de diciembre, que es nuestra sala para lo que son los premios Gaia y todo lo que hemos venido trabajando con la industria, buscando que se unan a los proyectos que estamos incentivando respecto a sostenibilidad. Dejamos abierto también la posibilidad para que puedan seguir conectándose a los 10 Spring Webinars que los tenemos abiertos para el público en general en la página web de la SPE. Igual, antes de dejarles, el día viernes tenemos otra conferencia, otro webinar donde vamos a hablar de crudos pesados y que nos va a acompañar el ingeniero Walter Paredes de EP Petro Ecuador. Ok, el día de hoy, como les decía, vamos a hablar de Geothermal Energy, an Option for the Future in Ecuador. Esta charla está dictada, va a ser llevada adelante por George Sutherland. Es geólogo de la Universidad de Alberta, George. Él ha venido ya dando presentaciones sobre energías alternativas a muchos clientes en Canadá, así como a nivel internacional a través de SPE Ecuador y el gobierno canadiense en Guatemala, Colombia, El Salvador y Costa Rica. Las diapositivas van a estar en español. La conferencia el webinar que va a dictarlo George es en inglés, pero si tienen cualquier duda, me la transmiten o nos la transmiten a través del chat y nosotros estaremos prestos a traducirlo y enviarlo a George para su respectiva respuesta. Okay, George, I don't want to take more time and get into the business, so I am going to let you start with the conference. So I explain to the audience that if they have any question, please set up in the chat and then I will translate to your information and after that, the answering of that. So welcome, and again, thank you very much for your time.
Gracias.
And I hope to see you soon in our new events of the energy transition during the next year.
We're certainly hoping to be able to do that. We have I think, some good ideas of what we might do. To be truthful with you, Fernando, I thought, well, okay, when I get through this presentation, then over the next 10 days or so, you and I will chat about what form that should take, and we can start to pick dates and get it organized this time for sure. We've done a lot of talking, it's time to do something.
For sure, indeed.
Okay, let's see if I can actually get this thing on the screen.
Now we go.
Okay.
We already have them.
Okay, perfecto. Mi nombre es George Sutherland, pero yo trabajo en Ecuador, but yo no hablo español bien. I would also like to, as part of the introduction, introduce Jack Archer, we work together for developing business in Latin America, and he was the one that provided the translation of the PowerPoint slides into Spanish. And in addition, without my compatriot here, Corin Zhong, who looks after business development in Asia, but also is our IT person. So when I don't know what it is that I'm supposed to do to make something work, I look over at him and say, help. So hopefully everything will go smoothly today. So geothermal energy. A lot of people have a lot of ideas about what it is. In general, everybody knows that it's heat that comes from the earth. And the potential for that is a huge amount, to be honest with you, 42 million megawatts potential, which is far more than what we use. So basically, it is heat that comes from the core of the earth and gradually, slowly migrates upwards. I've done a lot of work, presentations for First Nations on this topic, and even in Ecuador. And one of their concerns always is, well, what are we doing to Mother Earth? Are we taking the heat away and we're going to cool and we're just going to be a moon or a Mars with minus 100 degrees C or some such thing? No, that's not what's going to happen. You can't get more energy than actually moves in a day. You can, depending on the method you're using for geothermal, the energy can go down. So if you're taking it as heat and you're trying to heat additional fluids and you're pumping it through faster than it can replace itself, then yes, you can run it down, but you can only get so much energy per day, per hour, per minute, whatever it is, at a given site. Now that can vary quite considerably as you move across the country, whether it's Ecuador or whether it's Canada. So there you can see the general configuration of the earth and where the heat is coming from. Now, that could be low-grade geothermal heat, which is something that a lot of people, well, don't even have knowledge of. I've listened to a lot of presentations on geothermal from various people and governments, and particularly, and they only talk about very deep geothermal, but that's simply not true. It is a source, but it can be relatively quite shallow, as you're going to find out fairly quickly. We also could have a source of hot water, basically. Sometimes the rock is actually saturated with water, so we could circulate that hot water. Sometimes the rock is dry and doesn't actually have any, but it has a temperature, so we could circulate fluids past that in order to get the heat for some purpose. We also have fractured rock, and we can do engineering or enhanced geothermal systems, and we will talk about that later, but generally speaking, we can look at hydraulic fracturing. We can produce hot water from wells. In other words, for years and years and years, we've been producing oil, and it has a temperature to it. So if we recover that heat, it is a form of geothermal energy that can be used. And Scotland, for example, is using geothermal energy in the ocean. And we'll explain how that can be done because it has potential. So this is just a few numbers of showing the barrels of oil equivalent that we can get. As you see, the numbers are absolutely huge. When we get up to 2.4 times 10 to the 9th, shall we say, that's a lot of oil, or equivalency. So let's start with something that's quite easy. We want to talk about low-grade geothermal, and that's something that, as I said, a lot of people have not looked into or not aware of it. So the question is, and I often ask this when I'm talking to people doing presentations in person, where I can actually look somebody in the eye and ask them a question, how deep does a well have to be in order to be suitable for geothermal? And most people answer thousands of meters, but that's not true. As you're more than well aware, some of you might have actually been to Canada, But the part of Canada that I live in, and even further north from here, although global warming has been taking place, because yesterday it was 10 degrees C. Now, you might not think in Quito 10 degrees C is very warm, but I have seen it at this time of the year being minus 35 degrees C. So how deep do you have to have the well? Well, the only real requirement for geothermal is to have a well that goes to a depth in which the temperature remains constant for the entire year. So whether you have winter, whether you have summer, I want a constant temperature. And that can be easily 300 meters or less. So in other words, 3-hour drive north of where I'm actually sitting, they have buildings that are heated by geothermal, and those wells are only 60 meters deep. Well, that all of a sudden puts an entirely different picture on what geothermal could be or how it could be used. So this is the heat pump is the secret ingredient. It's the magic in the formula. And you can see we have one house, or we have one building. We have a heat pump. And the process is quite simple. We're going to circulate something like glycol down, and it's going to get heated at a constant temperature. Well, in Edmonton, that constant temperature is 7 degrees C. Now, at Siete, I suspect that you would not be too happy if your house or your office was at 7 degrees centigrade. You'd find it just more than a little cool. Even a Canadian would say it was a little cool. So what exactly we're going to do? Well, for simplicity, we're going to take a cubic meter of fluid at 7 degrees C. So what happens if we take 2 of them? Well, then we add it up and we get 14. And if we take 3, we'll be at 21 degrees centigrade. So we take that heat from 3 blocks and we get 21 degrees, and we can then put that through a heating system in a building, in a house. Well, what happens when it gets hot? You know, I've been in Quito. I know it can get warm and it can get humid, and you have air conditioning. Well, when you have a heat pump, you just reverse the process. And so you put the cool back up, put the hot down and put the cool back up, and you actually have an air conditioning system. So it can actually be used for 2 purposes. Heating when required, and we're just using this as heat now for geothermal. We will look at other things. So what I want to do is I want to try showing you this video.
Okay, something happened. It was good, but stop it.
This is Jacob, and Jacob, well, he'd like you to know that he has some very elaborate plans for your front yard. Jacob is an engineer specializing in geothermal energy systems, systems that use the energy that's trapped below the Earth's surface. No matter how far you go into our past, you will find humans using geothermal energy, and Jacob is convinced that the same can be said of our future. We met Jacob at the site of one of his earliest geothermal systems, tucked away in a secluded valley, to discuss digging holes and advocating for a technology that, even though you can't see it, is already all around us, here on Renewable.
We move heat from the ground and we upgrade it with magic and we put it inside the building. I mean, I can give you the detailed answer of how a refrigeration cycle works, but magic just is easier. My name is Jacob Komar. I own a firm called Revolve Engineering. We specialize in energy consulting, net zero buildings, and geothermal system design. So this is the Alfred H. Savage Center. It's essentially an amenities building. It's used for all kinds of events, recreational programs, summer programs, retirement parties, weddings. This building has no gas line connection to it. We don't need it. One of the disadvantages of geo is that it's hidden. And nobody walks by this building and realizes that it has a ground loop heat exchanger. A solar system is very visible. So you don't realize that there's double the amount of geo installs in the province than there's solar installs, right? So it's easy to say something doesn't work when you never see it.
So if we can't see it, how does it work? Below the center, there are boreholes, each going down about 200 feet. And they have to go that deep because they need to reach the point where the ground temperature levels out, where it doesn't matter if it's a hot Alberta summer or a freezing Alberta winter. The ground is basically the same temperature.
The ground is constant. So it doesn't matter if it's minus 40 outside, my ground temperature is 7 degrees. So that's a stable source. So that's why the efficiencies are higher than any system. And that's what drew me to it. It's the most efficient way to heat and cool a building, bar none.
What GeoExchange does is it collects that energy that's trapped below the surface, and it uses it to either heat or cool your home. As the glycol runs through the pipes, it warms up to the ground temperature around it. But that temperature, which is about 7 degrees, isn't warm enough to heat a building with. This is where the heat pump comes in. The heat pump concentrates the heat from the system, making it warm enough to heat an entire building. It can also run in reverse to cool the building down. As Jacob said earlier, it might seem like magic, but it works. And since the heat pump that moves all that energy around runs on normal electricity and not on natural gas, that means the GeoExchange essentially electrifies your house in the same way that you can electrify a car. As the electricity grid gets cleaner, your house runs cleaner too.
It lasts for hundreds of years. Like, you put it in the ground, and that's the worst part of plastic, but in this case, it helps us because it's there for hundreds of years and you're never gonna have to replace it. Obviously, the heat pumps in the building will need replacing, but that's one of the huge advantages is it's there essentially forever. It'll outlast the building.
We asked Jacob to crunch the numbers for us, and him being an engineer, he readily obliged.
Let's say your home uses 100 units of energy. 15 is electricity, 85 is natural gas. You do nothing else but attach a geosystem to cover off your space heating and hot water in your home. You took that 85 units of energy and you reduced it to something like 20. So now instead of 100, now your home's using 35, right? So bang for buck, you get way more for energy efficiency, in this case geo, just because of the efficiency. I'm 5 times as efficient as a traditional boiler or furnace.
Which raises 2 questions. The first, what exactly are you installing in my house?
You'll run plastic piping into your basement. You'll replace your furnace with a heat pump. They look identical. If you were standing beside a heat pump versus furnace, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's got a fan, a blower, so you connect it to your existing ductwork. So practically speaking, inside your home, except for your basement, you wouldn't have to touch anything.
And the second question this all raises, I guess more of a statement actually, is it sounds like you want to dig a bunch of holes in my yard. Is that an easy sell, and is it a good thing?
It's huge and exciting because if we think about it, the one expertise we have in Alberta is drillers. We know how to drill boreholes in this province. And we need a lot of boreholes drilled in this province for geo. And the amount of homes and the amount of buildings that we need to convert to electricity and renewable-based systems is mind-blowing. So we have a huge task ahead of us, but we're very well positioned in the province because we have all that expertise.
With an energy source as old as geo, it's easy to only ever talk about its past. But it's the job of Jacob and engineers and entrepreneurs like him to get us thinking about its future again. We wrapped up with him with a question to that effect. How do you convince people that the energy beneath our feet, energy we've been using since antiquity, is the future?
A geosystem is more comfortable, lasts for hundreds of years, reduces your energy use by 80%, which reduces your energy bills, which reduces your future energy risks. Let's start looking at the positives and the exciting things. So we need to embrace this challenge and lead in this, right? We still need petroleum right now. We still need oil. We still need these industries, but to rely on them forever, I think is folly. I think we need to transition as quickly as possible because we don't want to be left behind.
So you can see from that it's quite feasible. One of the biggest things, I mean, COP28 is about to start tomorrow in Dubai and run, I think, till December the 12th. And there will be more recommendations on various aspects of how to improve or reduce the amount of greenhouse gas, but this is one method that's quite simple and straightforward. And as he mentioned, because it's quite shallow, we can use plastic pipe. And one of the things another problem that the world is facing is how much plastic is in the ocean or even in our landfill sites, because it takes upwards of 300+ years for it to break down. So if you have a system in place with plastic pipe, the part that's under the ground as they're giving you your geothermal energy is going to outlast you and your great grandchildren. The actual building will probably be demolished and replaced long before you'll ever lose your energy system with the existing piping. So we can put it in vertically, we can have horizontal systems. And here you see your options. Here's a third option where it actually goes out into a pond type of things. So we're starting to almost look like similar to what Scotland's using in the ocean, but we'll talk about that later. So this is the residential thing. The heat pump is being used. So the diagram on the left is for the winter. So we're bringing the heat back up to the surface, and we're using the heat pump or the heat exchanger in order to get it up to a temperature that's reasonable. The diagram on the right is the reverse, when we're going to use it as air conditioning. So in this particular case, we're using geothermal, but we're using the heat that we can get from it. Now, we don't have to just use it as heat. It could be hot water, and we'll talk about some examples of that. And it also could be electricity. So when you have geothermal, you have the actual heat, you have hot water if you wish it, or you have electricity. So depending on what the needs are and where you're using it, you have options. A recent discussion I had with a company here in Canada, and I put up the wrong slide here. I apologize. I did get this translated, but obviously I picked the wrong one to translate it onto. So sorry about that. But shallow geothermal, we're talking about wells that already exist. And we're going to utilize these shallower wells, anything that's 2,000 meters or less. So we have a well that we're basically going to abandon. Well, a Canadian company is currently patenting a procedure to use abandoned wells close to greenhouses, for example, and using the energy we get from that for their greenhouses to promote growing. So I could see this technology being used, for example, not necessarily in the middle of Quito, but in the country where there's small villages where there's wells that are being abandoned that are close. They could be used to produce an energy source. In general terms, this technology has a tubing string in the well to circulate the hot water, but it's insulated tubing, and the company's just in the process. They're going to be starting a pilot project quite soon with a particular client here to actually try and help with food security in a greenhouse. But there could be other options that you might use that heat for. The hydrogeothermal types of applications, we need very deep wells so that we can get then the necessary temperatures. So what we're going to do, and obviously now you get the geology lesson, because we're going to put, we can do more than this, but in its simplest form, what we're doing is we're pumping water down, and because of porosity and permeability, we're able to, and the temperature of the rock at that point, we pump it down, and basically it's a water flood from an oil field in a sense. So we're going to pump it down, and as it moves across to where the second well is, it's going to get heated to the temperature of the rock, and it's going to come to the surface. Depending on exactly how you do this, you can put that, if it comes back as steam, you can put it through a turbine, and that turbine will then generate electricity. So now we have a methodology. We're using geothermal to actually produce electricity, which we can then put it into the grid that already exists. So another situation, this is a similar type of a diagram, a little more graphically, depends on what we do. So here we have hot water. We're circulating up as steam because the temperature is over 100 degrees C, and we're then putting it through this turbine in order to produce electricity. We have another system that we could be using. Also, if there's not sufficient permeability, flowability to the rock, we can actually use hydraulic fracturing in order to create the complete flow system. So again, it's an adaptation for technology. Hydraulic fracturing, in actual fact, has been used for well over 70 years in the world. So there's a diagram. Again, we're producing geothermal power, and we're pumping it down and back up again. And at some of those situations, this is down into the granite. So again, it depends upon your geology as to whether this is a feasible method or not, but this is being done. Iceland, for example, which is a lot further north than we are here, is actually able to grow bananas due to their geothermal energy. Now I know bananas in Ecuador are not a big problem, but in other countries such as this, it makes a big difference. So there's some of the options that are available. If you have volcanic rock, or if you have sedimentary rock, or if you have rock that actually contains hot fluids, or if you have rock that's just hot but does not have fluids, you can create through hydraulic fracturing potentially a cycle that will allow this to happen. Now, a couple of other applications. So what we just showed in the diagram is utilization of two wells. They could be wells specifically drilled for, or they could be abandoned wells from some oil and gas activity. We can also produce hot water, as I mentioned earlier, because we're separating the water from either the oil or the gas, but it has a temperature to it, and we can utilize that heat. So it's another form of geothermal energy, which we, in actual fact, have been wasting the heat for years and years and years through our production. So geothermal in the ocean, you say, well, how the heck can you have geothermal in the ocean? As you go down in the ocean, it gets colder, it doesn't get hotter. Well, in actual fact, what we're doing is we're utilizing that difference in temperature between the warmer water at the surface of the ocean and cooler deep water. Now, we don't have to go down 10,000 meters or some such thing. So we put the warmer water through a heat exchanger type of thing, and we're going to use ammonia, because ammonia very quickly has a low boiling point. So when we put the ammonia down through the cooler water, it becomes a liquid. But as it comes back up to the surface, then at the surface of the ocean, then it warms it up and it changes it back to ammonia gas. which then drives your turbine and produces electricity. Well, then we put the ammonia gas back down, cool it off, make it a liquid, and we just keep rotating it around in a closed system to produce electricity. Scotland, for example, has some projects that do exactly this sort of thing. So there's a diagram that shows you how this is being done, where the pump is and the heat exchangers in order to produce electricity. So we can use the temperature difference in the ocean at relatively shallow depths. We don't have to go down huge depths in order to make this work. So what are the benefits? You know, COP28 is about environmental issues. So are there any benefits to using geothermal energy? In other words, can they help to solve some of the problems that we see occurring and changing the climate of the world? First of all, geothermal does not involve combustion. We're not burning anything. So if you use natural gas or if you use fuel oil, you're combining it with oxygen and you're burning it, and it's going to produce carbon dioxide. Nearly zero emissions that we have to worry about. If we use geothermal, you don't, although I have seen some well sites in South America that were huge in size. They weren't in, I didn't see them in Ecuador, so I'm not picking on Ecuador today, and I'm not about to tell you which other country. I have seen very huge well sites with just the same drilling rig as you might see in Canada. You say, why the heck do you need such a big site? Well, it depends on who owns the cat and who's being paid to clear the site, how big the site gets to be. But if it's under normal circumstances, then geothermal well is a very small footprint per kilowatt of power being produced. It obviously, if you're using geothermal, you're going to reduce the impact of fossil fuel power. And existing wells can be repurposed, or you may have to drill new wells depending on the area or what you're trying to do. And the part about it is it's constant temperature generation of energy. The other thing about it is we often, and I do give other presentations on wind and solar and etc., but both wind and solar are not constant. Geothermal is constant. You get the same amount of power in the morning as you do at night, etc. Whereas if the wind either doesn't blow enough or blows too much, you have to shut the turbine down. Solar obviously works because the sun is out. Well, right now, as we approach the winter solstice here in Canada, another 3 weeks or so, the sun doesn't actually come out. It's getting closer to 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's dark again, as opposed to in June. Pedro in particular has been up here at that time of the year, and Maria. In June, everybody stands around, and you can sit outside at 11 o'clock in the evening and have no trouble reading the newspaper because it's still light out. So this gives you a geothermal potential for the world. You can see the capacity that we have here. So we've only really, when we look at potential, we're talking 300 gigawatts type of thing. So we've only really started to explore this in various parts of the world. Here's some numbers of where we're at this point in time, and you can see from 2009 to 2022, this would be basically December, or almost 11 months ago now. We've gone from 9 to 14, so in 14 years, we've almost increased 50% in our geothermal energy, and that's only going to continue to increase rapidly. So there we have some of the top 10 countries. The United States is Canada's not one of the top 10 countries, but you can see the countries that are actively using geothermal. But Ecuador has a lot of potential. And here it is by region. You can see by the different colors. Latin America is the dark purple band across the top of these bars. Not very wide, so it hasn't been increasing, but it is starting to increase. So the big players are the Asia Pacific as the bar at the bottom, and North America and Europe are the three biggest players in geothermal at this moment in time. But the whole world is gradually going to start to use more and more of this. There's roughly 38 countries in the world now that are using geothermal energy for agriculture, growing vegetables or drying vegetables or fish farming, etc. So there's a lot of commercial opportunities that can exist by using geothermal energy for, depending on what it is, the purpose you're trying to use it for. So affordable renewable energy. The cost per kilowatt hour for geothermal is roughly half of what it is for hydroelectric or wind power. So in Canada, for example, Canada's geothermal capacity is 1 million times the amount of energy that we're now using. And as I already said, it's more reliable than wind or solar. And I'm not telling you should climb on the geothermal bandwagon, and anybody wants to talk solar or wind should just leave the room, please. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is it's like a glove. We have several fingers in the glove. So going forward in the future, I don't see one of these being the provider of 99% of the energy. I see it being depending on the location, depending on the geology, etc., and the weather conditions. That wind will be a factor, solar will be a factor, but don't rule geothermal out because it can contribute significantly to the country's energy source. Here's a little bit of where we live. You can see the hotter areas, the geothermal gradient, which is important. Before you start geothermal, just like an exploration program, you have to do contouring, and we want to contour where the heat is. So there it is. You can see in Canada is primarily focused across the southern part of Canada are the best places for that, whether it's in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and to some degree in Manitoba, the 4 western provinces in Canada. So now we look at Ecuador, and we can see roughly where the temperature is best suited for geothermal energy. So as you can see, the theoretical potential is 8,000 megawatts. 1 megawatt of power is about enough for 1,000 residences. So you can do the math. 8,000 times 1,000, shall we say, is a lot. Technically, Ecuador 3,000 megawatts. Economically, certainly 1,000 megawatts, which means more than 1 million residences could be using geothermal power in one form or another. So here's another example of a project that we have here in Canada, and I'm not picking on Canada. I will talk about projects, but there's more projects in place here, and I want to show the options that are available. So this is a project. You can see we've drilled wells. We do have the drilling technology to be able to drill those 2 wells from 2 locations and go down and actually hit the other well. And you can see we're using multilateral drilling. So the loop is basically we're going to pump fluid down and back up the other side, but that loop is 2.5 kilometers long, so we don't have to have, just heat the fluid and pump it around and use it and recirculate it back down. So we have pairs of wells to be able to do that. And this is an actual project that's in place and has been in place for now pushing 4 years. So it's proven itself. So to give you an idea, this project cost $10 million. The depth of the wells are 2.4 kilometers. And, you know, as I said, the drilling technology is good enough to do this type of accurate drilling. And this project produces 10 megawatts of power, which means it's enough for 10,000 residences. Another example is this Green View project, and it came on stream a couple of years ago, and it's $50 million, and that would be Canadian, not US dollars, and it's about 1.35 exchange rate right now, or something of that order. It's 5 megawatts of power, so it would have enough power for 5,000 residences. And it will realize, this project alone will realize a reduction in greenhouse gases by 20,000 tons. That's long tons, metric tons per year. So it only takes a few wells to do this, and we see a big difference. So if you're reducing greenhouse gases by this much, it's a very effective energy source. Now, so this is another project in Alberta, and it's quite simplistic in actual fact. The town of Hinton, which is really, you wouldn't, in general terms, you might not even refer to it as a town because it's very, very small place. But basically, they have an abandoned gas well, one gas well. So what they're doing is it produces hot water. So they're producing the hot water and using it to provide heat into the municipal buildings in that city. So the population of Hinton is 10,000 people, and it's designed, this system provides the heat for 12 buildings just by circulating the hot water. So as we used to, if you ever went to school in Canada a long time ago, the schools used to have radiators and they used hot water. So again, you can see the estimated reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by using this rather than actually using natural gas to produce the heat is very close to 3,800 tons per year. The cost of this system is $10.2 million and expected to be repaid in 16 years. Now that's based on when we put it in. If the cost of natural gas goes up, the payout is a lot sooner, and as long as these buildings exist, then after the payout is completed, those buildings will get free, basically, energy other than upkeep and maintenance. So there's Alberta's potential of geothermal energy, which is basically 24 times the 2019 installed electricity. So our population could increase quite substantively, and we would still be able to provide power using geothermal energy. As we move to British Columbia, and we'll just to demonstrate that this is not just localized in one province. And we move to Saskatchewan. There's a project there referred to as the Deep Earth Project. In southern Saskatchewan, it's very close to the Canada-US border, and we're drilling wells a little over 3,500 meters. And the temperature in these particular wells is 120 degrees C. So 6 wells have been drilled, and the actual truth is that I've got 5 megawatts, but the actual capacity of this particular field, and you'll see a size of it, it's just a normal well site, is actually 20 megawatts, in other words, enough for 20,000 residences. So there's where it's located. Anybody that wants some Canadian geography, down just west of Estevan. So as I said, very close to the Canada-US border. And this is how the system works. Now this depends upon geology, because we're going to have injection wells where we're pumping the water down, and it has to go through the rock. So we picked it. In this particular case, it's a sandstone. It's a clastic rock, and it has sufficient porosity and permeability. If not, it might have to be augmented by hydraulic fracturing. And then we have producing wells bringing it up to the surface, and we're able to generate electricity by doing that. So there you can see the actual site. Now, if you looked at that and I didn't tell you it was a geothermal project, you might say, well, you must have an oil well there because you got all your storage tanks for the oil. It's not, it's geothermal. And we're storing hot water in that. So this is how the thing works. So when we're pumping cool water down, going through the sandstone, getting heated up, coming back up to the surface, and what we have then is we have a fluid, which that amount of heat, such as condensed compressed natural gas, so we can heat the fluid, it could be whatever fluid would work, back to a gas, put it through the turbine, produce electricity, and then we put it back to fluids and circulate it around, so it's a closed system. So as I said, your capacity is the rate at which you can put fluids down and heat them to the same temperature. If you pump the fluids faster, you will reduce the amount of heat because you only get so much per day or so much per hour, etc., to replenish what you're taking away. So it isn't going to stop, but you have to optimize the system in order to maintain it so that it will operate at optimum conditions continuously. Okay, Corin, we're going to try this again. So just be able to do it. Yeah. Can you hear that?
These workers are from the oil industry.
You guys are okay to hear?
They're using the same tools, the same science.
We wouldn't even know this resource existed if it weren't for the oil and gas industry.
But here, what they're looking for, more than 3.5 kilometers below, is water. Water so hot, you can use it to generate electricity.
All right, that's amazing. That's very cool.
Thanks to this project, named DEEP, Canada might soon have its very first geothermal power plant.
We're going to be producing power very quickly here.
This is southeast Saskatchewan. Geologist Kirsten Marcia grew up here, surrounded by crops and oil wells. And it's here she wants to spark a green revolution in the energy field.
I've been developing resources as an exploration geologist my entire career, and we looked at geothermal as a unique resource where, as long as the center of the earth is hot, we've got an inexhaustible, clean baseload power supply. Once geothermal is installed, it runs 24/7.
Yet, in this part of the country, there are no volcanoes. The resource is hidden deep underground, in rocks that are 500 million years old. It's very hot, salty water, 125 degrees Celsius. To give us a better look, the team hired a drone pilot equipped with a rather special camera.
You see, holy smokes, look at the temperature difference between that tank and that tank.
Thanks to its infrared vision, we can see the heat directly, even though it was a really hot day. The air was 38 degrees, and the ground was even hotter. Workers, by contrast, looked cold. You can clearly see the water pumped from one of the wells and stored in tanks.
That looks hot.
92.9 we're reading right now on the outside of that tank.
For me, this is amazing to actually see it. I mean, when you look at the tanks, you know there's hot water in there, but to actually see it visualized like this is pretty cool for us and our team.
Geothermal in itself is not new. But in Canada, it's never been used before to generate electricity. And for that, you need a lot of this hot water.
Geothermal uses massive volumes of fluid. So that tank farm back there, on a daily basis, we're going to fill and inject about 1 hour of those tank farms. So this is a huge water moving process.
To pump that much water, Kirsten Marcia also needed very specific rocks to allow the fluid to move around. Her treasure hunt began here. These archives contain core samples of everything that's been drilled in Saskatchewan, whether it's to find oil, diamonds, gold, uranium, or potash. But what she was after were actually holes.
So this is a sandstone that has really great porosity, and that porosity is connected so that the fluid can move through the rock.
The other main ingredient is the temperature, and she found it in public data somewhat by chance.
So when you drill a well, you do what's called geophysical logging, and of course temperature is one of the readings that's also taken. Interesting, it's actually usually just used for calibration, but in our case, temperature was the key piece in what we were looking for.
Both temperature and porosity pointed to rock formations deep below her home region along the U.S. border.
This is a sweet spot, so within the stack of pancakes, that is the sedimentary units that host all of these resources, there is a particular sweet spot that is more permeable than the rest, and it's going to flow better for us.
That explains the design of the first power plant. The next drilling goes down 3.5 kilometers, and once in the sweet spot, the well becomes horizontal for another 2 kilometers. A twin well will go in the other direction, and further north, 2 more pair of wells will join them.
So the hot water comes out of the ground, we pump it, we run it through a heat exchanger. So we harvest the heat out of that brine, and that's where we're done with it. So now we've got the heat, and then we introduce it to a working fluid. In our case, probably butane. That butane goes from the liquid phase to the vapor phase, and that's what turns the turbine. It's actually called binary cycle because you've got a loop of this refrigerant running, and then you've got a loop of your hot brine, coming up hot, going back cold for reheating.
The water, now at 65 degrees, is re-injected between the pumping wells. As it percolates through the rocks, it picks up heat little by little. The question is how much distance you need between the different wells. That was precisely the focus of the test carried out during our visit. For weeks, the team pumped water, added a chemical tracer, and re-injected it 750 meters further. That way, one can measure how long it takes for the water to move through the rock before it's picked up again. The first plant will generate 20 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 20,000 homes. The team is already scouting locations for a second plant that will produce another 20 megawatts. This well goes to a record depth, more than 3.7 kilometers. To test it, a pressurized gas is injected at the very bottom. After a few hours of waiting, the gas rises back and the water starts flowing. The key information, of course, is the temperature. But a chemist also analyzes its composition, looking especially for salts that could accumulate in tanks or pipes. They are also checking for bacteria, which could proliferate and clog the pipes or cause them to rust.
We don't want to get a surprise. I mean, the resource could vary a little bit better, a little bit worse, but the quicker that we understand the nature of it, the better. Right, well, we expect that this to be very, very similar to the other wells. One of the things that we've learned about this resource is that it's very, very consistent, very predictable. But because this is a fairly big step out, this is really going to test that theory that this is a very consistent resource. We want to take a big step out to see if there's any subtle changes.
Geothermal power plants never use all the energy contained in the water. Elsewhere in the world, the water is still warm enough to heat swimming pools, fish farms, greenhouses, or even sidewalks during the winter. Kirsten Marcia believes geothermal can help her region diversify its economy and go green without turning its back on the oil workers.
We've got this unique situation where we can draw upon all of the world-class expertise, all of the world-class technology to develop this resource. If you looked across Canada, there wouldn't be a better location that's already pre-set up to drill these, really amazing wells. It's perfect. And we can then, use the oil field workers and redeploy their skills for the first time ever on a renewable energy project.
All right, so that shows you a very deep project as contrasted with a shallow project. So we can start to see just how diverse geothermal energy actually is. So again, to reiterate, it could be used as electricity, it can be used as hot water, or it can be used as heat. So all of those have an application depending on what you want to use it for. This is a general cost comparison. This is a world thing. So the numbers don't necessarily apply to exactly to either Canada or Ecuador, but you can see the geothermal heat pump is one of the lower costing methodologies for producing energy. So what about Ecuador? The energy potential is 3,000 megawatts. One of the projects you can see is a plan for 50 megawatts, which would be enough energy for 1,000 homes is what it's planned for. And it's expected to be on operation in the next 3 years at an estimated cost of 250 million. Now, 250 million is not pocket change, admittedly, but once the system's in place, then it's simply maintenance management, and the system keeps producing the same amount of heat. So they're probably more for my benefit than anybody else's. There's the actual location in Ecuador as to where this is, not that far from Quito. Other types of projects that are in place in Chile, there's a 33 megawatt project, geothermal project. Bolivia has a 5 megawatt project. Colombia isn't quite as big in scope. They have a small scale pilot project, which is 100 kilowatts. There's another one, SPE Oil Complex. They're going to produce geothermal energy, 250 kilowatts, to actually for their facilities at that site to produce electricity. Now, and all of these things, you have to have regulations. Now, unless you happen to be a lawyer, you probably wouldn't be too impressed if I started going through this thing regulation by regulation of what exists. These are some of the regulations that exist in Canada, and in Alberta, their Bill 36 was passed by the Canadian government, or the Alberta government, because energy is a provincial matter here. And if you go to www.aera, you'll get to Directive 89, and you can read the whole thing yourself if you're involved in that. British Columbia has had regulations, both a law and a Resources Act in place for about 3 years. The Alberta has only been kind of a year and a half now, type of thing. One of the issues that in Saskatchewan, they basically at this point are still looking at geothermal under their oil and gas regulations. Now, admittedly, there's a lot of similarities. You're drilling a well, you're producing something, but there's one thing that has to be taken into account. You start to look at the royalty structure, for example, or, excuse me, the fact is that geothermal goes forever, whereas we all know there's a certain lifespan to an oil or natural gas well. So BC's looked at it more as an oil and gas project in their wells, and it doesn't account for exactly how you handle long-term, very long-term types of developments. In the United States, if you go into the Bureau of Land Management, or in Texas, the Texas Railway Commission, they also have rules in place. So all of these can be accessed free to find out how it's being handled. But you do need to look at the regulatory requirements, because although it is energy, it is not going to fit hand in glove under the existing oil and gas regulations, particularly in Ecuador with your extra heavy oil. There's a big difference in how you want to regulate this form of energy. So that basically is an introduction to what's available, what types of things can be done. Again, just to reiterate, geothermal energy can be very deep energy, depending on what size of project you're trying to do. If you're trying to provide energy for a significant portion of Quito, for example, or it can be down to single buildings or houses, as you were demonstrated on the video, and those depths can be literally a few hundred meters. And it can be used in three purposes: hot water, electricity, or heat. So that's no mess. See.
Excellent, George. Thank you very much. It has been a really good effort, and we appreciate that you put the slides in Spanish. So then it's gonna be more understandable for the people that is not familiarized with the language. Anyway, I am pretty sure that it has been a really good time. And we have a really good time and a really good conference that you present. Let me ask some questions that we have now. Well, I am going to put in Spanish, and then I am going to
translate. Well, there's two ways we can handle questions depending on how many you have.
Well, we have just 2 questions.
Oh,
so
okay.
far.
But it's okay. Also, I'm not an expert. I just know quite a bit about it. So if the question don't feel I actually really know the answer, I've got my pen and a piece of paper, or you can send it to me, and I will get the answer one way or the other. Either I'll give it to you now, or I'll do some research, or ask some of the specialists that work with me on geothermal. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, so well, regarding the first question, Washington, gracias por estar presente. Sí, vamos a compartir no solo, más que la presentación, va a estar colgado el video de todo el webinar en la página web de la SPE, lo puedes descargar. Okay, the question is from Maria Mercedes. She said, and also Pedro.
Well, we don't answer her questions.
Okay, which should be the main characteristics? I mean, she said physicals and economicals to consider in the exploitation of the geothermal energy in Ecuador.
What was the first words in the sentence, in the question?
Okay, it's Maria said that which should be the main characteristics, and when she
the main characteristic for determining the geothermal energy in Ecuador.
Yes, it's even physicals or economicals.
The first two things are, and I showed a general map that showed where the hottest spots are, the highest temperature gradient is in Ecuador. So that's obviously the location that could produce the potentially very high rates of geothermal energy. Now the question is, where is that location relative to where you want to use it? So transportation becomes the issue. So if you're going to use hot water, you can't put a pipeline in for 500 kilometers and pump hot water, and your energy loss would be too great. So that type of project would have to be focused primarily on electrical generation because you already have a power grid in place. Depending on small villages, for example, you might want to consider shallow geothermal energy because it could be used for something to do with food security type of thing, whether it's land-based fish farming or some such thing. So you have to, it's not, the thing about any kind of clean energy, it's not even country versus country, it's area of the country, population density, etc., will determine which form of, of which should, the problem today is I only talked about geothermal. We needed to talk about solar, we need to talk about wind, we need to talk about biomass, we need to talk about hydrogen, which we did previously, but you have to identify what type of geothermal energy do you want to use? In other words, what's applicable to that particular geographic area of Ecuador or any place else? And how do you want to transport that energy? Is it like if you had something outside of Quito, like they were talking about the Saskatchewan project with 40 megawatts of power coming from geothermal, of course, it would be a significant power supply. But for a village out in rural Ecuador, that project it may or may not be feasible. And also you have to look at the environmental implications, as we're well aware. Well, if you're going to drill a well, there has to be an environmental assessment. You just don't chop down rainforest. I mean, I've seen it chopped down, and not in Ecuador, but I've seen it in Bolivia, where farming is, and there's not very much real topsoil there. So every 3 years they burn another several kilometers of it to establish greater farms. So it's kind of a combination of how much energy is needed, and you can look at geothermal, but you have to recognize you've got 5 fingers on your hand, and I've only talked about one of them today. So you have to look at, it is feasible in Ecuador. I truly believe that there's a place for geothermal energy, but you have to look at where is it going to be and how are you going to distribute that energy as to, is it economically feasible, or would wind be a better choice in some particular areas because it's easier to put it straight into the grid type of thing. So it's always cost versus, but geothermal definitely can be a part of the energy picture going into the future for Ecuador. Is well suited for that. And it might well even be, as you go to the ocean, what Scotland's doing, that might be feasible for that area or producing it. So I can't give you a definitive answer, just, and I hate to, I posed more questions than I provided answers, and I'm sorry for that, but it's like drilling a well for oil. You have to have a geologist and a geophysicist and an engineer, etc., before you put the X on the map. And it's the same with this. It's just different specialists that need to be involved.
Great, George. I think that it was, as you mentioned, it's part of the solution, but we have to start it now. We have another question, and I have to also mention, George, that for now...
This must be Pedro that's asking the question.
For sure. There are some projects here in Ecuador also. There are some companies that are trying just to use the production water and using the heat of the production water just to generate some energy. So, I mean, this is the indirect geothermal projects, but I think I am also agree with you that there is a huge opportunity for Ecuador in terms of the use of this geothermal as an energy alternative. We have 2 more questions that I would like just to share with you. First of all, one is, do you know maybe how is the calculations of the geothermal gradient?
Well, there's not a calculation for the geothermal
It's
gradient.
to calculate the reserves of the geothermal gradient.
I can't give you a formula right off. Basically, you have to start with the map of Ecuador, and you're basically looking at what energy is coming to the surface. So in a sense, you're making a contour map, only it's a contour map of energy coming to the surface type of thing, because that's what you're trying to bring, or the heat at a certain depth. And so you have to look at what is the temperature and how much, because some of these projects, particularly if you're, like they mentioned for Saskatchewan, they have to use huge volumes of water in order to generate enough heat. So you have to look at what is the temperature and how much are you trying to get. You can't get more than it's willing to give. So it's almost, it's in some ways it's worse than an oil and gas well, because an oil and gas well, you kind of understand the rocks a lot better. Whereas with geothermal, you can move 5 kilometers away and the geology may appear to be the same, but is not in terms of geothermal.
Good. I think that it's covered the answer of the question. I have another question. It say that thanks, nice talks. It's from Andres Gorky. I would like to know if, in your experience, how to involve the academy in geothermal projects in Canada.
What, I'm not understanding that one word. Is that First Nations?
No, what he said, Andres, is basically he wants to know, in your experience, George, how you have seen the or how can you see the involvement of the academy, university, and all of this?
Oh, the university. How would the university be involved? Now,
involved in the geothermal there in your country, in Canada?
Well, either there or here, the answer is basically the same. The only difference is that Ecuador is probably a little bit further behind. And what I mean by that is, and don't take this personally, Fernando, but you and we're not at the end of our careers, but we're not at the beginning either. So it's really the people you're asking me about are really the people that we need to talk to about this, because we're just, Canada has some projects in place, but we're really at the infancy, to be quite blunt about it, and so is Ecuador. So it's really those people. And as I suggested to you when we had discussions over the last year type of thing about actually having some sort of a conference in Quito to look, so that we look at all of the options in one platform. So we're not just looking to be prejudiced and only talking about geothermal, but part of that is to start to go to the universities, go to the engineering faculty, go to the environmental faculty, etc., and start to look at the curriculum and building the technology into that. It could be, maintenance and operation at a technical school where you're turning out, technologists after 2 years, or engineers after, or potentially, as I started it, Pedro and we spent some time in the past working on a potential curriculum for a master's degree program in heavy oil. And it was focused on the concept that engineers that are already in the industry could benefit from advanced education. And so we looked at, well, how could you possibly have some evening courses and some Saturday courses type of thing, and actually have a company, in a sense, sponsor their own employees with a problem they need solved, so it becomes a research problem beneficial to, well, the same thing could be applied here. But it's a matter of the longer we take to start implementing or amending the curriculum in any type of school, it's because those are the people that are really going to develop this going forward. And so my recommendation is if we can get going forward, and I actually can see you in person, I personally would like to spend a week and go to the 5 different universities and have a talk with the beginning engineers to get them up to speed on what's happening and get them interested in how they're going to take Ecuador forward in the future. So it's strictly speaking, curriculum design, which you and I can be the catalyst or whoever else to start to get universities and schools involved.
Totally agree. It's necessary just to thinking in the curriculums and also including this type of subjects. Okay, according with the time, I'm just going to give you one more question, and I'm sorry for the rest of the attendance, but you have the contact in the first page of the slide. So if you have more, if you want more information from George, we can provide if he allows.
Yeah, by all means.
To give
this is typical. I did what did I do? I did a hydrogen presentation for 4 Latin American countries, and I had 235 people. and so I'm quite accustomed to, you can't, even if only a third of them asked a question, you'll be there for the rest of the night. So I've often said, submit the questions. They can send them to you or they can send them directly to me. It's okay if they're in Spanish, if they send them directly to me. And I will answer them. I will answer them by answering them, but also copying you so you can distribute it to all the participants.
For sure, we will. And that's what we have thinking. If there is more questions of there are more interest just to talk with George, we put.
I mean, in the perfect world, I would love to bring the whole group here, and I don't mean because of financial things, but what didn't happen today and can never happen, it doesn't matter, is I want to take you to a site so you can actually see this. And, you know, Pedro and Mercedes will tell you we did some stuff on heavy oil, and then we came to Canada and we went to actual sites and saw activities, and all of a sudden it starts to fill in a lot of gaps as to, you know, what can be done and how much space it takes and what it really looks like.
That's right. That's right.
No, it's the same with hydrogen. It's really, it's developing so quickly. There's like Shell, for example, has got hydrogen service stations. If you drove by them, you wouldn't know that it wasn't just a normal service station, but it's actually on the pump, it says H2, but otherwise it looks the same.
Sure, sure. We really appreciate, George. I'm pretty sure that we can stay here for another 2 or 3 hours discussing and with a lot of questions that we have.
Well, by all means, send them to me, and
for sure.
I'll prepare, you know, answers and send them back. So, I mean, the purpose of these types of discussions is not only to disseminate information, but get people thinking. And sometimes they need to ask some questions for clarification. But as I said, I really believe, and you know, I have been to Ecuador many times, and
indeed,
I believe there's a lot of potential. But you can't be thinking, well, this is Wednesday, so next Monday we're going to be doing geothermal energy. No, that's not going to. It's got to be part of a broader plan. So I've only given you, you know, it's like going. It's going to, well, I have a lot of favorite restaurants in Quito, type of thing. But you go to a restaurant, you can have an appetizer, a main course, a soupa, or you know, pastries, whatever, sweets, type of thing, and look at it as a meal. And that's what we're talking about. And we only got to the appetizer today, so to speak. And you really have to not meaning you personally, but as in energy development, it's really important to have the same kind of a talk on all of the other options so that you know what's on the table. All I've done is I've put maybe 2 cards on the table. Well, there's another sequenta cards, and you have to know what they are before you know how to play the game.
Yes, and we are agreeing something that it's happening. The energy transition is here, and we have to move it on. In spite of that, we have oil and gas production. We have to think in the alternative energy. It's necessary.
Well, think in the alternative energy, but some governments, and I'm talking primarily the Canadian government, which is based in Eastern Canada and doesn't have oil and gas production of really any sort by comparison. But, you know, there are some individuals that say oil and gas production have to stop dead. Well, that would be a disaster for both Canada and Ecuador. My thing is they haven't asked the right question. And the right question in my mind is, can we use hydrocarbons without the negative impact of greenhouse gases? And in general terms, the answer is yes. So I don't think the oil and gas industry has to stop. We have to look at how we can, in other words, we have a problem. Instead of just saying stop, if you have a problem, you look, is there a way of solving it? And I think there is. Now, included with that is also the application of solar and geothermal, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, that's true. That's true, and this is happening also in Ecuador, as you mentioned. We have a field that it has to be closed. It's less than 50,000 barrels. Anyway, I considering the time for you as well. Let me put in Spanish to the rest of the attendings that you are going to be able to answer any other question in a private chat. So I am going to receive, well, SP is going to receive the questions, and then we are going to pass through you, so then you can prepare the answers.
Perfecto. And it's easy to prepare the answer in Spanish.
Sure. Google Translate is useful.
I can send the answer back in Spanish.
Sure.
I think Jack is listening in, my translator.
Great. We will have, I hope to know also Jack's. Anyway, queremos agradecerles a todos los presentes por estar el día de hoy en esta charla importante de la SPE. Les esperamos para nuestra nueva charla el día viernes, donde vamos a hablar acerca de justamente los desafíos de explotar el crudo pesado en el Ecuador. Por favor, como lo dijo George, si ustedes, esta presentación va a estar, esta grabación va a estar en la página web del SPE. Si necesitan preguntas, directamente nos la envían a nuestra página web, a nuestro correo electrónico, y nosotros le trasladaremos a George para que él les pueda hacer llegar las respuestas. Muchísimas gracias. And George, I will contact you probably tomorrow or Friday, and then we can discuss more in detail regarding the possibility to have you in Ecuador during the next year.
Perfecto. Gracias.
Gracias, George. Gracias a todos y que tengan buena tarde. See you soon, George.
Yeah, I have a meeting at 11 mañana.
Okay. Okay, so after that, I will contact you.
So it'll be in the afternoon.
Good.
And
so
on the TARDIS is no problem. Or
I will send you an email.
Okay. Perfecto.
Okay. Gracias, George.
Gracias.
Take
Hasta
care.
luego.
Hasta luego. Gracias a todos. Buenas tardes.